Hi, everyone. We're here today to talk about the importance of compliance and training in the collection industry and other industries with back office operations. We have with us Colene McNinch from Maxwell and Graves Solutions and Christopher Rickman from Peak Revenue Learning. Could you guys introduce yourselves and talk a little about your backgrounds?
Hi, I'm Chris. I spent much of my career in executive positions in the collection industry. I started as a collector and served in positions such as Vice President of Operations, COO, and CEO. I was very operationally oriented, and that included training and compliance. I started Peak Revenue Learning and developed Knowledge Source to address the challenges and opportunities in training and compliance seen by professionals.
I am Colene McNinch, Partner and Chief Compliance Officer at M&G Solutions. And similar to Chris, I started my career as a collector in this industry in 1995. So I've been on the receiving end of many training programs. As a Chief Compliance Officer and consultant now in the financial services space, I now have the pleasure of helping other companies design and implement effective training programs within their organization.
All right. Well, let's start with a kind of fundamental question. Why is training important to an organization?
Sure. I'll take that one first, Chris. So I think the most important reason for training is to mitigate risk. There's all kinds of risk that should be considered. I think the most obvious one for me, given my role, is regulatory risk. So education around the requirements to comply with consumer financial law is imperative for an organization to avoid violation of those laws. As we know, that can cause unwanted attention from federal and state regulators. Chris, what other kinds of risks do you think we should consider here?
In addition to regulatory risk, there is a contractual and financial risk. Clients expect representatives to be trained to carry out their job functions in compliance with regulations, policies, procedures, and any contractual requirements. And if you're not in compliance with these or meeting these requirements, you're jeopardizing your relationship with your client. Training can mitigate financial risk by enhancing revenue, lowering rework, and decreasing turnover. It also decreases the likelihood of compliance-related issues, such as the resources required to investigate lawsuits and complaints, the legal cost you may incur, and any fines or settlements.
Who should be required to take training?
Well, the CFPB says that all individuals up to and including the board of directors or highest governing body within an organization should receive training. And that training should be sufficient enough to enable them to understand their organization's responsibilities to comply with the law. Within the CFPB's examination manual, they say management and staff should receive specific comprehensive training that reinforces and helps implement written policies and procedures. I think there are different approaches to determining who takes what type of training. So some approaches, or one approach could be that everybody takes everything, right? And that could be a less sophisticated training program, still works. Everybody's getting everything. It satisfies the requirement. And as training programs become a little bit more refined, the training can be applied at a role-based level, so which is definitely more efficient. It does require that roles within the organization be more clearly defined. And by that, I mean, determining whether the employee is speaking to consumers. Do they have access to sensitive or confidential information? So really drilling down to figure out what the aspects of their role entails and what type of training they need to receive in order to ensure that they're following the policies and procedures and the laws that dictate those activities.
Agree 100%, Colene. Role-based is probably the best way to go.
Yeah.
How frequently should training be taken?
Our frequency can vary. Sometimes training is done at hire and then annually thereafter. In contrast, Peak Revenue Learning software enables you to implement spaced, continuous micro-learning.
What is continuous microlearning? Can you define that?
Yes. It is nuggets of information that are related to someone's job function that are usually presented on a daily basis. At other times, in addition, it can be information and knowledge that is presented less frequently, but where the goal is to focus on best practice. This type of training promotes much deeper learning and knowledge retention. It also helps develop a culture of quality, compliance, and accountability. In addition, our software will automatically create documentation, which I think everyone would agree is key.
Yeah, I love that, Chris, that approach of the continuous repetitive learning. I think there's, perhaps this expectation sometimes that, that employees take training at hire and annually thereafter, and you sit down and you take this training and you're supposed to remember everything. And there's so many things to remember, between systems and client requirements and regulatory requirements. And I love this idea, not only just generally of repetitive continuous training, but the way that Peak Revenue Learning's platform is able to present information in such a way. And I think it really truly does help with a deeper learning and retention of the information.
So let's say that I'm a manager at a collection agency. How can I ensure that my training program addresses all the aspects of risk that are relevant to my organization?
Well, I think the first step is to conduct a risk assessment, and that risk assessment assists in identifying the activities of the organization that could lead to consumers either suffering economic loss or legal harm, or just, result of violating federal consumer financial law. So you start with the risk assessment. It's important, to have a means and a methodology in place to help identify those areas of risk. Sometimes that is a dashboard of risk-related items, perhaps a homegrown or CMS-based software that tracks information, complaint and dispute-related information, and also provide great insights into especially issues that are driven at the agent level. So you really have to drill down, understand the activities that the organization is involved with, conduct that risk assessment. Once you identify those areas, then the creation of the relevant training materials can begin.
Colene, training isn't just about regulations and regulatory obligations. It also includes negotiation skills, system training, company and client specific policy training.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, regardless of the type of training that an employee receives, that they should be able to access materials and policies and procedures on a day-to-day basis. It is one of the expectations of the CFPB, and I know that your platform has the ability to store training materials and policies and procedures, and I think that's great. Just in the event the agent is not retaining everything that they've learned, that they've got that on hand to reference in the event they've got a question.
Absolutely. And so many times our policies and procedures contain certain actions and behaviors that are required to implement the regulations and any policy, company policy or client policies and procedures. We suggest that these actions and behaviors be used to create the daily continuous training nuggets of information.
Yeah, that's great.
Are there requirements or guidelines regarding training that organizations should be aware of?
Well, within the CFPB supervision and exam manual, they have outlined their expectations and examination objectives regarding training. It is one of the components of a sound compliance program and one of the items that they review during their examination. So there's some pretty clear guidelines and requirements within the exam manual from the CFPB's perspective.
And of course, companies themselves should have their own training requirement to cover systems and applications, as mentioned earlier, relevant HR policies and procedures, collection skills, and of course, very importantly, data security.
Mm-hmm.
It's not unusual for clients to have required training for the employees of their vendors. That could include both regulatory and brand training.
Mhm.
How do I ensure that my training materials are accurate and reflect any current law?
Well, one thing to do is constantly monitor for changes that are occurring within the industry. At a minimum, an annual review of your materials should be conducted by a compliance or legal professional, or some other qualified person. Colene, do you have any suggestions on what monitoring looks like?
Yeah, so I kind of take a couple of approaches. One is just industry resources, so online industry resources. I get emails on a daily basis from ACA, RMAI, Consumer Finance Monitor, Inside ARM, just to name a few, but several industry publications. I also love joining webinars, both live and recorded. So there's a plethora of free webinars out there. Lots of industry rock stars, whether they're compliance professionals, frontline operations managers, lots of legal professionals in our industry that participate in these webinars. And there's always some really valuable insights to glean from the articles and the webinars themselves.
Agreed. I think it's worth pointing out that if the person assigned to this task is not a compliance or legal professional, that you should have them reach out to professionals in these areas for assistance.
Yeah, I would agree that the training is, it's got to be accurate and it's got to be current in order for it to be effective, especially as it relates to regulations. As we know, those are constantly changing.
So what happens if I don't implement a training program that meets all of these standards?
Well, I think that takes us back to the beginning of the conversation, which is that not having an effective training program presents risk to an organization. And that risk, again, could be regulatory, financial, contractual, reputational, right? So there's all kinds of risk associated with not properly training your employees. Especially employees that interact with consumers, whether that be directly or indirectly. So an agent talking to a customer on the phone, or a payment processor for that matter. So direct or indirect contact with consumers. And those individuals make decisions that could violate law and cause harm to consumers. And of course, that draws unwanted attention from the regulators, which none of us want. And as far as the CFPB is concerned, they expect depository and non-depository financial service companies and their service providers to have effective and comprehensive training programs in place. As part of their exam process, they leverage their procedures to ensure compliance with their expectations. And so failing to follow their guidance could also, could result in supervisory or enforcement action.
All right, those are the questions I have for you guys today. Do you have any parting words or final things to add?
Clearly, in today's business environment, high quality, high impact, compliant services are expected by regulators, by clients, consumers, and other stakeholders. Investing in training and compliance is not optional in the modern business. It can be complex and ever evolving. Our training platform, Knowledge Source, will help you decrease risk, increase revenue, promote accountability, lower training costs, and reduce turnover.
Yeah, and I think not only is it not an option, but it's also not an easy task to design an effective training program, because there are so many moving parts and there's so many considerations that need to be made. So at M&G Solutions, we love to help our clients with this task by performing risk assessments, developing training programs and content that meet both regulator and client expectations. So if you find yourself in need of services, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Chris at Peak Revenue Learning, and we'd love to help you along your journey of training program development.
All right. It was great to talk to you guys today. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience. If any of you watching would like to reach out to Colene at Maxwell & Graves or Chris at Peak Revenue Learning, you'll find their contact information on the screen and below. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.